preparation for the upcoming school activities, I wanted to just give you some particular tips and best practices around the risks that are unique to the school environment. I assume many of you are churches that have schools as part of those ministries, but please feel free to send us some chat if you have questions or if you have a unique situation that we can address as well. So let's get started. This is a little ambitious, but I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly. And again, I'm going to make sure that y'all get access to these slides. So if there's anything that you missed or you wanted to follow up on, I'll make myself available for that as well. So just a little bit, I'm going to talk about Presidium and who we are, how we work at the insurance board to serve you. Going to talk about the scope of 3 different types of abuse or 3 sort of different lenses that we look at this through. We look at adult to youth. We also look at preventing false allegations because many of the best practices are going to be the same for that. And also we look at youth to youth, and this is an area that more and more schools are becoming aware of the dynamics of and the impact it can have not only on those who've experienced abuse, but on the school and the school community. Going to hit on a couple of particular high-risk situations, again, those things that are unique to the school environment. And we're also going to talk about how to respond, how to make sure that we minimize the negative impact that can happen on the school community. And then at the end, I'll also mention some of the resources that are available to you through the insurance board. Great. A little bit about Presidium. Presidium is Latin for to protect or fortify, and we've been around since 1992, and our mission is to protect those in your care from abuse and to help preserve trust in your organization. And we really serve the full range of organizations that serve children, youth, and vulnerable adults. We've worked everything from schools, churches. We're the national partner with the YMCA and Boys and Girls Clubs. We really run the full gamut of those different types of organizations. And we offer the full range of risk management solutions. So this is the only type of risk that we focus on, but we do it very broadly in terms of how we help those organizations manage that. Here's the good news. Abuse is preventable. This is not something we could have said 30 years ago. We didn't understand the dynamics well enough, but we really do now. And for so many organizations, it's not so much not knowing what to do, but really rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work, because unfortunately it's not just a matter of checking a few boxes, doing a few background checks. I wish it was. That would certainly be a lot easier. But our paradigm here at Presidium is this safety equation, and if you've been on any webinars or any trainings that we do, you know this is really the foundation of everything at Presidium. And real quickly, it's just our model that shows there are 8 key operations where safeguards need to be put in place. And when that's done well, if this all adds up to a safe environment, that's great. We know, however, some programs are going to be inherently weak in some of these operations, and so you're going to bolster other parts of the equation to bring balance to that. And if you're interested in learning more about this, we have a lot on our website. But effectively, we help organizations implement best practices in each of these operations to create the safest environment possible, whether it be a school, a youth sports league, a church, what have you. So as I said, we're going to talk about 3 types of abuse, youth to youth, adult to youth, and false allegations. Let's talk about adult to youth abuse first. And really, this is probably the area where most of you have already had the most training, which is great, because we know that 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 7 boys experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. There was also a very large study that was funded by the U.S. Department of Education a few years back that replicated over and over that about 10% of children experience sexual abuse in the context of school. So an adult at school, a coach, an administrator, a teacher, a contractor, perpetrated abuse against 1 in 10 children. We also know, and what we don't talk about enough, is that about half of molestations in schools, and really across the board, are committed by other youth, typically adolescents. So that's a dynamic we really need to start unpacking because that's another layer of protection that we need to be providing young people in our education programs. We also know that 80% of abuse doesn't get reported. We know this from retrospective studies where adults report this. That's something that we want to interrupt because we know that the sooner a child seeks help, the more successful their healing journey really is. Okay, just a quick snapshot here of who abuses. I think most people, when I say the word sex offender or even child molester, we kind of get that image of the dangerous stranger. That's really the smallest group that we see, about 11%, which is great because this is a very different dynamic. When a child is abused by a stranger, there's usually a very violent component to that, and there are no warning signs. It's someone who abducts a child, and they are aroused by the pain that they cause. So that's a very different dynamic, and unfortunately, like I said, we don't get a lot of red flags, but we get a lot of stranger danger type training. About a third are family members. I think this is the category that most people think would be the next biggest, but it's really not. The biggest category, it's 60% is someone else who the child knows. So a friend of the family, an acquaintance, a caregiver, a teacher, a minister. It can be anyone who's sort of in that circle, and this is where we see the most sexual abuse incidents. And these are the types of incidents that we're really going to focus on today because we don't have a lot of control of what happens in the home, right? So we want to say, here's what we can do when these children are in our care, when they're on our watch. So really, an adult needs 3 things to abuse a child. They need access. And when we think about schools, how hard is it to get access to children? Well, it's not hard at all, right? They're there every day. Some kids are particularly needy. Even something as simple as a child who needs some tutoring. There's a one-on-one opportunity there. Also, there is the need for privacy. So abuse is not a public type of event, right? So how can someone get privacy with a child? And we'll talk about this in a bit on the high-risk situations section. Most incidents of abuse we're seeing actually happen off campus, in a teacher's car, in a teacher's home, while overnight at a sports tournament. They're not happening as often on campus, so that's something we need to be aware of too. And the other piece is control, and this is really the manipulation that happens in that relationship, and really one of the reasons why abuse can be so damaging. A couple of red flag behaviors here. Again, I'm sure this is a refresher for you, but an adult who prefers time and friendship with youth more than adults, right? So they're not really with their peers. They spend more time with the kids. Who has a favorite, who's using inappropriate languages or jokes, giving gifts. You can see what we have here, but really this leads to just poor boundaries. Someone who is not the adult in that situation, and we need them to be the adult, the professional. Someone who's going to, I'll highlight, use social networking to communicate privately. Again, when we think about that access, privacy, and control, once we get online, all of those things can come together. Just wanted to give you a snapshot of our data that we track here at Presidium. We actually monitor a helpline that is available to our clients. And again, we have found over the last year that well over a third of these incidents are happening away from the program. So we see things in dorms and locker rooms, playgrounds, bathrooms, but away from the program is I think, a big takeaway, hopefully, today in all of this. And really, it gets back to having better boundaries. So texting, social media, emailing, babysitting, tutoring. And I know sometimes this can be harder if you have a church community. Most of the folks go to church together, they go to school together. These folks are very, they're very close. But it's important to establish those boundaries with staff and volunteers who are at the school to make sure that they're not overstepping. Okay, and that really lends itself into the conversation about preventing false allegations. So a lot of these red flags and boundaries that we've talked about are things that we want to recognize in other adults, but we want to make sure as colleagues, as peers, that we're helping each other stay in that acceptable zone and not going outside of that. So really encouraging folks to follow policies regarding student interaction. So many of you may have policies or a code of conduct that say this is allowed, this is not allowed, this is allowed, this is not allowed. And while it may feel punishing to really have to dictate what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, when you do that, it gets everyone on the same page. And it makes it a lot harder to write off someone's behavior to, oh, well, that's just how they are. That's just, I've known her all her life, and she's just like that, so she tends to mother everybody. Well, we have a new normal now, so we need to make sure everyone's on the same page, because unfortunately, in a lot of cases, looking back, there were all sorts of red flags, right? Reducing one-on-one interaction. So if you do have a tutoring program or something like that, how can you make that as public as possible? How can you make sure that other adults are walking by, there's an open door, because we want that child to be safe, but we want your staff member to be safe too, right? Increasing supervision, and then just training and increased awareness. Again, it's a very different reality now than it was even 10 years ago. And so it's important that staff and volunteers get the training so they don't make mistakes that can get misinterpreted. Okay, a couple other things, using the rule of 3 or more, so not being one-on-one, being in the line of sight of others, not showing favoritism, following policies, avoiding secrets and gift-giving, and social media. So a lot of churches now and schools have great social media policies. If that's something that you don't have, I would strongly encourage you to do that. And there are ways that you can still use social media in your ministry, but we want to avoid that one-on-one chatting and communication, because that's where we see boundaries get really gray. Okay, so switching gears now, we're going to talk about youth-to-youth abuse. And as I mentioned, this is an area that's really getting a lot of attention right now, which is good. It needs it. We know this represents almost half of the sexual abuse incidents, and there was a recent study that said for every incident involving an adult at a school, there were 7 incidents of this nature. So that just gives you a sense of the scope of that. Got a little bit more statistics here. This same study showed us that 17,000 incidents were reported between 2011 and 2015. And the majority of the incidents involve older students. So not to say it doesn't happen with younger students, but we tend to see adolescents acting out more in this way. So the dynamics in this type of abuse are a little different. We don't really have that sort of predatory model that we might see with adults, or we don't see that model of the dangerous stranger, certainly. Youth-to-youth sexual behaviors and abuse is really more opportunistic. And really the best way to prevent this type of abuse is supervision, right? Because if we think back at the safety equation, we can't really screen our students very well, and they don't have the requisite maturity to do it anyway. But it's all about, is there an opportunity? We see incidents happening so often in bathrooms, locker rooms, places where they can get privacy and really be away from supervision. Certain types of activities lend themselves to this sort of behavior. So anything involving water, whether it's a field trip where they go swimming, swim classes, anything like that, and a lot of it is sexual curiosity, and may be indicative of a larger problem in that child's life. And there are some things that may seem age appropriate or developmentally appropriate, but we want to encourage you not to talk yourself out of it if you see something. When a child is acting out sexually, it needs to be interrupted. We can't write it off to, well, that's age-appropriate development. Because in some cases, it is abuse, and that needs to be reported. So as I said, part of our internal tracking with our clients of the types of incidents that we're seeing, youth-to-youth incidents, a lot of it's playgrounds, bathrooms, and locker rooms. And again, it's those places that are harder to supervise. So, our staff, educators, when they're outside supervising the playground, that's probably a nice little mental break for them too. But what we've learned is that if staff are not closely, intentionally supervising, that's when we can have problems. So it's not just a matter of, well, we're going to go to the playground, we need at least 2 staff out there to help supervise. No, it really needs to be very specific and saying, I'm going to watch this part of the playground, you're going to watch this part of the playground, you're going to watch this part of the playground. So it's really, unfortunately, not a break for the adult staff. It's when they should really be that much more aware. So some things you can do to decrease the youth-to-youth abuse risks. And I just want to emphasize again that this type of abuse is very prevalent, and we know that the long-term effects on children of this type of abuse are just as profound as if they had been abused by an adult. It's really something we've got to spotlight. But having structured activities. So I guess coming off summer, I'm kind of thinking about the camps that we visited, and there's, in the afternoon, an hour of free time, which everyone loves, but when it's not structured, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to supervise effectively. So if you want to give young people free time, give them 4 or 5 options. You can do this, this, or this, not do whatever you want, if that makes sense. Got a question here about ratios, and as I said, ratios are a good thing. It's not a fail-safe, but most states have guidelines for licensing that you might want to look at. I believe here in the state of Texas, if you can't hear it from my accent, that's where I'm calling from today. For school-agers, I believe it's 1 to 12 that they like to have. And again, different states are going to have different regulations, but I would give that as a very minimum guideline, if that helps. But the person that's asked this question, if you'd like, I can follow up from your state and see what those are. Guidelines for affection. So this is just important too with the kiddos as it is between adults and students. That even sort of culturally creating little, hey, this is how we high five in the morning. Not to discourage affection, but kind of setting some parameters for what's appropriate and what's not. Line of sight supervision. I would also say line of hearing. Just because you see kids go into the bathroom, you don't really know what's happening in there, and again, that's where most of the abuse is happening. Documenting and reporting policy violations. So here's the same thing. I mean, we need to hold young people accountable to make sure that we see a pattern. If a child is acting out in different classes, we need to be able to see that pattern, and I'm actually seeing a lot of school districts implement apps and other technology to help track those things. And really responding to these situations can escalate quickly. And what we found is how many of these start is they're playing a game, and the game becomes sexual. Or there's bullying, and the bullying becomes sexual. So it's really important to stay on top of that and supervise, interrupt when you see inappropriate behavior, and document it. Okay, just wanted to highlight a couple of the particularly high-risk aspects in school ministries. Anytime you have undressing and nudity, we just hear case after case in locker rooms, children doing, unfortunately, horrible things to each other in locker rooms. And I know adults might not feel comfortable being in the locker room to supervise, so it feels like a conundrum, but there are things that an adult who's supervising young people can do, standing in the doorway, whistling, making your presence known so that they're going to be less likely to act out. Keep them moving so that they don't have time for shenanigans, right? Let them know, okay, you have 2 minutes to change, and then the bus is leaving. Whatever you need to do to make sure they don't have time to mess around. Other high-risk areas, transportation, right? The buses. Seat adult staff throughout the bus, not just in the front of the bus. Really think strategically about how you're going to supervise that activity. Bathrooms and locker rooms, transition periods, right? Before and after school is where we tend to see a lot of problems. Less supervision. Making sure that truth or dare type games, anything involving power dynamics, are not allowed. Some places are going to be higher risk, so anywhere you have isolated areas or rooms, again, trying to minimize the opportunity for privacy, rooms without windows, bathrooms and locker rooms, or even sort of outside areas. I mentioned some of these already, but bathroom and locker room tips, make isolated areas strictly off limits. So sort of scope out what can and cannot be supervised easily. So make it very clear what's not allowed. Following that rule of 3, and when possible, do bathroom breaks as a group. And have an adult stand outside within earshot, saying, come on, guys, let's keep going, wash your hands, let's go. And then it's really good to sort of limit the number of students in the bathroom to the number of stalls. So if there are only 4 stalls, 4 kids at a time. We don't want more than 1 kid at a stall. And prohibiting horseplay. Again, these are the sorts of things that we know can quickly escalate. If you do travel or overnight trips with your sports teams or other getaways, just make sure that you've really got a good plan going into that, and have some supervision. You're not on your turf anymore, and so you need to understand as much as possible that environment and what the rules are going to be uniquely to that environment, and communicating all of the rules and expectations with students and parents from the beginning. And also be aware of who has access to the facility and the program participants. So if you're going to be in a hotel, is there another big group that's going to be there, right? Okay. And just a couple notes on responding. There's kind of a spectrum here that, we're talking about responding to inappropriate behaviors on one end. The other end of that is suspicions of abuse. Those are very different protocols. And then the youth-to-youth sexual behavior kind of has some unique aspects as well. But, we all know that reporting is crucial, and most of you are probably mandated reporters in your state. And if you're not sure, look it up. States are passing stronger and stronger legislation, and folks are really being held increasingly accountable for underreporting, right, or not reporting in some cases. So it's important for everyone's protection that you understand your role in reporting. When we talk about those red flag behaviors in adults, it's important to interrupt and spotlight the behavior. And ideally, there's a policy that you can point to say, Mrs. Jones, remember we have a policy about tickling. That's a little easier to say than, Mrs. Jones, I don't like the way you're acting, right? So it's not a judgment call. It's saying, hey, I need you to get back in this acceptable zone in our code of conduct. But following up with that supervisor as well, again, this could be part of a larger pattern, and it's quite likely that someone who steps out of bounds is not a sexual predator, but they need to be reminded because we don't want them to be accused falsely, right? Okay, and keep reporting. If we can report these low-level concerns, we're a lot less likely to have to deal with major incidents of abuse. So more of this, interrupting behaviors if you see it. Follow your mandated reporting requirements always, and report immediately to your supervisor and follow your documentation requirements. So this is kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's important that you know your state-mandated reporting requirements. Very similar protocols when we talk about youth-to-youth sexual abuse behaviors. It's a matter of interrupting. Don't talk yourself out of anything by saying that's just normal curiosity, and documenting that so you can see if there is a pattern with this particular child. If a youth discloses that abuse is happening in their life, whether it be at school, at church, at soccer, or at home, we want folks to just have some preparedness about that. And it's something that I hope none of us ever has to do, but it's such a precious moment when a child does disclose. And that response can really set the course for their healing. So we just encourage folks to stay calm and listen, to comfort the child, not criticize that child if the first thought that pops in your head is, why did you wait a year to tell me this, right? That's not helpful for that young person. So, don't let those words come out. Noting the facts and reporting, right? So these things, again, if you've had mandated reporter training, you've probably had this. But we don't want anyone to not report for any barriers of this nature, okay? And we want to make sure that folks don't feel compelled to investigate it, that they don't say, well, I'm just going to wait, I'm going to do a little searching around before I decide to report. No, that is, in many cases, illegal. Okay, I know I blasted through this information, but the good news is you have access to a full catalog of online courses. One of them is unique to the school risks. We have courses on mandated reporting that touches on every state. We have courses on child care, foster care, and we just dig deeper and deeper and deeper into different topics and across different types of ministries. So I want to encourage you to utilize this resource. It's called the Armadas Learn to Protect training system, and it is provided to you through the insurance board. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you how to do that, but I really want to encourage you to utilize that and to make it available to your staff and volunteers. We also have an amazing tool called Know Your Score, and this is an online self-assessment that walks you through best practices in each of those operations of the safety equation to make sure that your program, your church or your school is doing everything it can to create the safest environment possible. The really cool part about Know Your Score is not only does it tell you where you have gaps, it provides resources where those gaps are identified. So I know a lot of organizations are just getting started on developing youth-to-youth prevention policies and protocols. It's all in the tool. So we really want to encourage you to utilize that. It's a tremendous service that the insurance board is providing for you all. And then we also offer discounted background checking services to the denomination served by the insurance board. And if you are an insurance board member, there is a substantial subsidy involved as well. So whatever you're using now, it's definitely worth looking into because of the savings that you will get. So these resources can be accessed at the insurance board through the Safe Conduct Workbench. So again, we'll make sure you all get these slides, but you can go on there and see how easy it is to get access to all of those resources. There are also model policies. I know many of our other clients would love to have a resource like this, so I want to continue to encourage you in that regard. Okay, folks, well, I blasted through this today. There's so much to learn, and I really just tried to hit the high notes. I am going to give you my information here. Again, my name is KristyShiller. I'm the Vice President of Account Services here at Presidium. I've been here for 15 years, so I've seen a lot, and would love to share those learnings with you. Do we have any other questions today? Well, again, folks, I'm sorry we had some audio difficulties at the beginning. I hope this was a good use of your time, and I just want to wish you all a great school year. Hope you get a little more rest as summer's still here. But I'm just really grateful to you all for being here today and to the Insurance Board for sponsoring this. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, I'll come in now. This is Gerald Sink. I'm Director of Loss Control for Insurance Board. I want to thank everyone for their patience and for attending today. We certainly want to thank Presidium and Kristy for helping us with this presentation. We hope it went well for you, and we hope you gained value from it. If you have any questions, Kristy's obviously been kind in providing her information. You can also reach out to me. You can email me at gsink@insuranceboard.org, or you can contact me at 216-736-3248. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you.